localwebradio.fm.
Welcome to This is Soccer with Chris Murphy, Executive Director from Coastal FC. Now, here's your host.
Hello, this is Nick Jaworski, and I am here today with Chris Murphy, the Executive Director of Coastal FC Soccer. And today we're talking with Chris about the player pathway in Canada. And Chris will be discussing what opportunities exist for players and what is a realistic expectation. Now, before Chris joins us, just a reminder that if you have questions or require any sort of assistance, that you can always reach Chris through the website www.coastalfc.ca. That's coastalfc.ca. Chris, it's great to be talking with you again today.
Thanks for having me on, Nick.
All right. Now, Chris, if a young person has had a really strong connection to soccer just throughout their childhood, they played in community leagues, and they want to continue on in a more advanced, mature way, it is good to know that there are opportunities that allow that for them, and I'm sure that's what we're going to talk about with the player pathway. So what is that?
Yeah, so I call it the player pathway just because I think everybody starts in soccer, especially from a young age, with the parents' attitude of, let's put our child in some kind of sport. Soccer makes sense. It's economical. It's in my backyard, and they just need a pair of shoes and a shin pads and be able to run around. So, but what you're finding over the years as players stay in the game and people develop at different rates and they start thinking about potential outcomes is, where does this all lead for me? And that's why, the pathway model is designed to create a structure and information around, if you do this and progress in this way, here are some potential outcomes. And, I think that there's a lack of information and awareness, and I believe that there's an opportunity for virtually every player, if not every player in the game, to carry on once they're outside of the youth game. And it used to be that people just didn't know how to access those opportunities. And so what we're trying to do is put a bit of framework around that and provide that information and provide those outlets, because, at Coastal FC, one of the big things for us is we want to keep players in the club. We want to keep players enjoying the game. We want to grow the community, and so this is an important piece of it.
For sure, and it's interesting, in the vacuum of not having a framework, if I'm a parent or even a player, you might find yourself coming up with your own paths that may not be correct. I mean, so this is nice for somebody who understands it to sort of lay it out for us.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's almost two things. As you've mentioned, you may not understand the pathway or the opportunities, or more probably, you may not understand what you need to do to give yourself the best chance to access those opportunities. And, as an example, one big area of focus right now is university and college outlets, both in Canada and the U.S. There are so many players that could play and and carry on their career, if you will, while getting an education post-secondary, but there's just a lack of understanding about what steps to take, when to take them, and how to prepare to access those types of opportunity and potentially be recruited.
Yeah, well, okay, well, that's a great place to start then. So let's outline the pathway, the player pathway.
Sure.
So where do we start and where can we go?
Right. So at the highest level, if you've got an ultra special player, and the percentages are so low,
right,
but they're there nonetheless, is the national team in the professional game. So that fraction of 1% of all players who play at the highest level that can make the grade at that level, they can maybe have a look at that level.
Right.
Below that, you really then start getting into university and college opportunities. And again, it's very difficult to make a recommendation or to say one is necessarily better than the other, but safe to say in the United States, there's the NCAA, which most people are familiar with. There's a number of other college and other, sort of outlets, if you will, that have different entrance requirements athletically and academically. In Canada, there's the CIS. There's also the college stream in Canada. And again, there's different opportunities and levels of access for players there. There's, of course, below that, and this is a big part of it because we find that most people come back to this in some way, shape, or form, and yet they still don't know what the opportunities are, is the final stage of long-term player development in Canada is active for life. And what that means is that at the end of the day, when you're finished your career, whatever that looks like, do you still play soccer with adult teams? Do you come back as a referee? Are you coming back and coaching? So, for us, we want to keep stakeholders in the game, and we want to have them carry forward in whatever role they are. And even once their playing days are over, there's still plenty of opportunities to get involved and stay involved in the game.
Now, that's actually an interesting question. Are there leagues for adults that sort of function the same way that, Coastal FC does for young people?
There are. There's a huge amount of opportunity for adults right into in our area what's called the BC Old Timers, which is over 40, over 50.
Oh wow!
We see guys well into their 60s every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. They play on the same fields on the same day at the same time every weekend, and it's fantastic to see. And it really closes the loop of the club culture, because on one hand you'll see a field that's thriving with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and on the other field you might see their grandparents literally playing in the same park. And then you'll see people coaching, and it really is what a community club should be about, in my opinion.
We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with Chris Murphy, the Executive Director of Coastal FC Soccer. And when we return, we'll be discussing more of the player pathways and what players can do to seek out opportunities. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
More This is Soccer after a word from our sponsors. If you've been known to enjoy a nice glass of wine, be sure to tune in to From the Vine to the Wine with Matt Berzovich on the Lifestyle channel on localwebradio.fm.
Hillcrest Bakery and Deli presents Old Time Radio on the Specialty Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Would you like to get more from the devices you own? Not quite sure where to start? There is help. Catch Powering Up for Non-Techies with Justin Martell, Computer Department Manager at London Drugs, on the Specialty Channel on localwebradio.fm.
It's time now for more This is Soccer with Chris Murphy for Coastal FC.
All right, we are back with Chris Murphy. Now, Chris, what steps should young players, take to achieve success as they try to move, up or over the player pathway?
Sure. Well, I think the earlier you start thinking about things, and think with an open mind, when you look at all the possible outcomes, let's say you're 12 or 13 years old and you're a good little player, you're a good student, and you think about all the possibilities that may be there for you. Again, we mentioned professional game, we mentioned college and university, we mentioned playing as an adult in your community. And I think what people need to realize is that there's a lot of planning and preparation that goes into the process of trying to unlock those opportunities. And I've seen so many players who are really talented, both academically and athletically, that just don't understand the steps to take to try and make those opportunities available to them. So they end up getting fewer choices when it's time to the youth game, because they haven't planned and prepared and given themselves the best chance to have success in the way of more options, if you will. And so I might suggest that the first thing players need to do is start by doing a strong self-analysis. So where am I at realistically at my level of play, relative to my peers, relative to my league? Where am I at academically? What people forget sometimes is that Canada, for sure, and certainly at the higher levels of NCAA, you're very much a student athlete. This is not about soccer first. We see movies and we talk about the basketball stars and the football stars in the States that, can't spell their own names, but that's not the reality of the way the student athletes work. And so you have to meet the minimum standards from an academic standpoint, even to be considered generally as an athlete for a given school. And I find that especially especially young players who are so focused on the sports side, and although their parents are constantly talking to them about, school and studies and the importance of those things, I don't think that I remember when I was 13 and 14 years old, that certainly wasn't a priority for me.
Yes.
But kids need to realize that it's a massive, massive importance when it comes to the options that you're going to have once it comes time to review your options at the end of your youth career.
And real quick, what is one way that, if I'm 13, 14 years old, that you mentioned like do a self-analysis of your playing abilities. Are there like benchmarks I should be looking at for success that would give me an indication of how good I am? Well, again,
I see a lot of people that maybe aren't honest with their own analysis. And as an example, you see as a former recruiter, which I was for a professional club, mm-hmm. I'd see players who were not even at the top of the league or the team that they played in, yet felt that they would be able to make the jump up to the professional level or the professional youth academy.
Right.
And so, again, it's not to say that you shouldn't have ambition and dream. It just means be realistic, so that what that means is that you need to try and align your outcomes with your abilities. And because you can spend a lot of time and energy seeking out something that may have such a low probability for success for you, whereas that the opportunity cost there is that you've now missed a really great chance to perhaps get selected for a team or a school that you'd be perfectly happy with, but you've misguided
right.
yourself early on in the process by not having a fair assessment of your own abilities academically and athletically.
That's really interesting. Now, what are the biggest myths about professional and or college level soccer?
Well, the biggest myths for professional soccer is that, I don't even know if it's a myth, but the reality is that it's very hard to make it. You look at the North American game, again, having been in that world previously, the amount of players from the community youth system that make it into the professional academy are very, very few. Mm-hmm. The amount of players that make it from the professional youth academy, even if they get selected there as a youth player, that actually get offered a professional contract are very, very few. Mm-hmm. And the amount of players that have an extended professional career where they can actually earn a living at it are very, very few. So the nice thing about that is that if you're aware that you can possibly, in an outside chance, get there if you're a really talented player, but yet you also realize that it's more probable to look at the college and university route, you actually prepare to be a professional, but you have a safe landing spot where you can go back and say, okay, right, this is a very realistic opportunity for me. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to my point about the biggest myth around college and university, and that's that it's hard to gain access or it's impossible to get a scholarship. I see so many players that are not as good as other players that get all kinds of opportunities, both from a scholarship standpoint and from a school's recruiting them standpoint, purely because they were committed to the process, purely mm-hmm. because they started early and they realized what they needed to do and they put themselves out there. So number one for me is that there is a place for so many players to play. They just have to be committed to going through the process and to becoming educated and informed and to making sure that you take control of your own destiny. Mm-hmm. Having been a recruiter, one of the biggest myths I think around the recruitment process is that recruiters will come and find you naturally. And the reality is that there's so many players out there right now to choose from that, of course, the best players are generally found. But there's a lot of players that are just under that level that are very, very talented, that right. people would be very interested in recruiting. But they just get missed because the player doesn't know how to get in front of the recruiter, and the recruiter doesn't know how to find them. Mm-hmm. So I would say, learning the process about how recruitment works and understanding ways you can put yourself in front of a potential recruiter for a school, it's essential to the process. It can define the success of your process.
That's fantastic. And of course, that awareness of the process plus making sure you've got your grades in order and all that stuff, I mean, that would open up just a wide range of schools, right?
For sure, yeah. And I think that's the trick is that, when you're planning don't fixate on an outcome. Try and give yourself the most open doors that you can. And the younger you start this process, the more opportunity you have to open doors. And then as you get towards the end of the process, you start picking which door you want to walk through. And that's the best way I can sum it up. And again, going back to the point about being recruited, some key points that I think people need to realize is that, video and social media and YouTube channels, there's a lot of ways people can get recruited that don't have to cost a lot of money. They don't have to be complicated. And the nice thing is that kids are so savvy with technology these days that they have so much access to getting information in the public domain so quickly that they just have to be resourceful. The flip side to that is that people have to be very careful with what information is out there, and social media is a really big one. Every recruiter that I know right now, one of the first things that they do with a potential recruit is they search them on the internet and they see what kind of stuff is on their social media. And so players, you have to realize that's a deal breaker in so many cases. I've seen so many talented players not even get a look because somebody found their Twitter account or their Instagram account or some account that's there and it's got inappropriate material or things that would not make the institution proud, and they automatically discard your profile.
Wow.
So it's absolutely essential to make sure that your social media is absolutely squeaky clean.
Well, that's we're running out of time, so that's a great place to stop for now. Maybe we can talk about recruitment at length in the future. But Chris, thanks for the information. And if anybody would like to hear about what we've talked about today, you should go ahead and share this podcast with them. I know they'll thank you for it. If you enjoyed the show, you can always share us with your friends on Facebook at facebook.com/coastalfc.ca. Also on Twitter at coastal_FC. And, of course, the website, www.coastalfc.ca. Chris, thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to This is Soccer with Chris Murphy, Executive Director from Coastal FC, on the community channel on localwebradio.fm.
On your computer, on your smartphone, on your Wi-Fi radio. We're localwebradio.fm.
This episode is a production of Jam Media. For information on hosting your own web radio show, visit jammedia.com. That's www.jambmedia.com.
The opinions expressed by our guest and host on localwebradio.fm do not necessarily reflect the views of Jam Media or its owners. No expressed or implied opinions of any product or service should be considered an endorsement or recommendation of any kind by Jam Media or its owners.